Hi everyone, welcome to Learning Impact. In today's lecture, we will discuss characteristics of culture along with detailed explanation and examples. So let's start. Okay, first we have to look into the definition of culture briefly. What is culture? Culture is the man-made part of the environment. This definition was given by Herskovits. And this man-made part of the environment means that it includes all the practices like the cooking practice, the farming, all the techniques, the innovations, as these all are the innovations and ideas which was developed by human. Similarly, it includes all the other aspects, including the dress choice and also all the man-made part of the environment. This is the culture. All the material things and the non-material things, either it is in the form of devices, it is in the form of the dresses that we wear, or it's in the form of the ideologies that we develop over time. These all are our culture. If we briefly summarize that what does it mean by culture, it includes three major things. First is that what we think, all our thinking or thoughts, these are our culture. These are all the ideologies that we develop over time, and it is part of our non-material aspect of culture. We have discussed culture in detail in the last lecture. We have discussed it, that what does it mean by culture, and we have discussed its types also. So there are two aspects of culture, like material and non-material culture. What we think is included in an aspect of a non-material culture. What we think, for example, in case of the abortion rights, as the different societies have different perception to it. In case of the Colombia, is a society which never justify abortion, but on the other hand, there is a society Sweden which always justify abortion. So how we think of a particular phenomena is part of our culture. Then the second thing that include in our culture is that what we own. It is a form of the material culture, like what are the devices that we use. All the devices, for example, the pen which I use, the paper I use, the phone devices, the laptop, these all are that we own. And also that how we act, how we do our practices, these are also a part of our culture. It includes all our practices, the religious ceremonies, also the funeral ceremony, communal prayers. These all are our acts and our practices. These are our culture. So culture includes three major things, that what we think, what we own, and how we act. Now we have to look into the characteristics of culture. In this lecture, we will discuss 15 characteristics of culture along with detailed explanation and examples. So first is the characteristic which is called that culture is learned. It is the characteristics of culture that culture is learned. What does it mean that culture is learned? It means that it is not something that is innate, but it is something that we acquired information about over our lifetime. It is something we learn with time, through the process of socialization and inculturation from our elders and also the institutions that also play a key role in helping us to internalize the norms of our society. So in that way, we can say that culture is learned. Remember that there are two types of behavior in our society, that is the learned behavior and unlearned behavior. Learned behavior is always those behavior that we learn, like for example, in case of all our culture, as it is a learned behavior, like how to greet with others. We have to say salam while greeting others. This is the behavior that we learn. Similarly, shaving, it is the behavior that individual learn with time. But on the other hand, there are unlearned behaviors in our society that is not part of our culture. Unlearned behaviors are those that are innate. For example, closing the eyes while sleeping. It is something a child learns since birth. It is the innate behavior. Similarly, eye blinking reflex. It is the reflex that individual perform without learning from elders or an institution, because something unlearned behavior. So it is a physiological. Unlearned behaviors are physiological, and learned behaviors are that we learn from our society, from our surroundings, maybe from the peer groups or from our institution. Culture includes only those behavior that is learned. Unlearned behaviors are the biological aspect, and culture include all the learned behavior. And within the learned behavior, we have two types of learning, that is the conscious learning and unconscious learning. Conscious learning is those that it is a type of learning which we are intended of. We engage in it actively. We actively aware of such type of learning. For example, in case of we learn a language, for example, if I learn German language, English in a classroom setting, is a learning that we do in a formal setting. So for example, if I tend to learn English language in a formal setting, this is a conscious learning. But on the other hand, there is unconscious learning, which is that we learn unintentionally. We learn through the immersion in society and interaction with others, which we learn within association, as we are part of a different social group and association. So we learn some kind of behavior and absorb some kind of norms which we mostly are unaware of. For example, in case of the child learn about the native language. Since childhood, over the time of childhood, he learned about the native language unconsciously. He unconsciously absorbed these words. He unconsciously absorbed the communication pattern of his parents, and then when he grew up, he also tend to communicate in the same manner. So this is the behavior that we learn unintentionally, in which we are not actively involved in, and also it is a type of learning which is informal. So culture is a part which is solely depend on our learned behavior, in which the conscious learning is also included and the unconscious learning. So in a culture, there are some things that we learn consciously, like as we discussed, that learning a language that is not native. Okay, native language learning is something unconscious learning. So there are conscious learning and unconscious learning, as we say that culture is learned. Now, in case of as we say that culture is learned, there are also two kind of processes which you use to learn the language or to learn the culture. So in that way, it includes socialization. Socialization is a process of internalizing the norms. It is a process through which we internalize the norms of our society. This is a socialization. And the other is enculturation. Enculturation is a process of cultural transmission. When culture, the norms that we learn, and then we pass down that norms to our next generation, that is enculturation. These two are the process of learning that we utilize whenever we grow up in a particular culture. And then the means of learning. As we say culture is learned, so there must have some means through which we learn the culture. The means of culture include symbols. Symbols are anything to which we attach meaning. For example, in case of the raise fist that determine the strength. It is a symbol. Similarly, the red light in traffic indicate a kind of message to stop the cars. So this is the symbols, the thing to which we have attached meaning. These are the symbols of our society. Similarly, in case of the Russia, yellow flower has a kind of meaning. Yellow flower means break up relationship. Similarly, in case of the China, white flowers are associated with ghost. So these are the things to which we have attached meaning. These are the non-living things to which we have attached meanings. So these are the symbols. In that way, it is considered a mean of learning, because through symbols we learn different things that are important or hold significance in our society. And on the other hand, the language are the collection of symbols. When the symbols, there are collection of symbols which convey a particular message, it become a language. So in case of the language, we have books, literature, movies, dramas, theater. These all are from which we gain information about our culture. So the symbols and language are the means of our learning. Okay, so if we summarize this characteristic that culture is learned, so it will be that culture and the biological differences are largely independent of one another. When we say that culture is learned, it means that it is not something innate. It is independent of our biological differences. So it means that the people's culture does not grow out of their gene pool or the biological makeup, but it is because that we learn within a society through the process of socialization and enculturation. And the other thing, that when we say culture is learned, it means that people don't learn culture by trial and error. It negates this statement that culture is learned by trial and error. Trial and error has no play in learning culture. Trial and error means that people don't learn that what is good to eat primarily by trying out a variety of things that might have been edible and then rejecting things that were not edible, rather than other people taught you that what is and what is not defined as food. Like, how do you come to know that what is edible when you were a child? It is because that your parents, your elders, they taught you that what is edible and what is not edible. You don't learn about these things by primarily trying out each and every food, each and everything, and then from the consequences or from the result you draw a reference, you draw a conclusion that this thing is defined as food and this thing is not defined as food. It is not like this. It is not like trial and error. It is something you learn from your parents, from your ancestors. They taught you and they point out that what is edible and what is not edible. So these are the culture includes some other things that we don't learn by trial and error, because these are our forefathers who have passed through the same experiences. So they share their knowledge. They share their knowledge with us, and in that way we are able to understand the different things in our surrounding. So we can say that culture is learned means that it is independent of our biological differences, and it is also not learned by the trial and error. So if we summarize this and we give example at the end that how culture is learned, for example, shaving is a behavior that is learned. It is not something known by individual, known by a child since as he born. It is something he or she learned when he grew up within a society. Similarly, greeting, the way of greeting, like for example in Indian society they say namaste, in Pakistan society they say salam. So in different society has particular way of greeting which we learn while living within that society. So this is that culture is learned. Now the second characteristic is that culture is social. Now what does it mean by social? Whenever we talk about social, it means it refers to the social interaction. So it means that culture is learned whenever we are interacting with others. It is learned within association. Culture cannot be learned by individual when he is alone. Culture cannot pass by individual alone, but it is social. It is shared by majority people, and it is something that we become part of association, then we become aware of it. So culture is social means it originates and develops through the social interaction. When we interacting with others, we understand that yes, it is the correct way to greet with others. In that way, we are able to understand that what is good and what is bad. Similarly, we understand that no man can acquire culture without association with other human beings. Like it cannot be possible an individual who is living alone and he will have no culture, because culture is something social. An individual human, if he is living in isolation, he has been grow up in isolation, it is not possible, because humans are also social beings. So in that case, for example, if you take the assumptional case that the individual who has been isolated or who has been grow up in isolation in a remote area where there is no other human, in that way he will not possess any type of culture because he hasn't internalized any norms. In order to internalize the norms, you must have associations, you must have interaction with others. So that's why we say that culture is social, means that no one can acquire culture without association with other human beings. So as we say that culture is social, so it has some advantages and disadvantages. First, we will look into the advantages. Whenever we say that culture is social, means that we learn it within association and while interacting with others. It means it can help us to spread the innovations. For example, if I have found a new kind of recipe of cooking, I can share it with others because I am living in association with others. So all the cooking recipes which has been modifying over time is something that people learn when they are living in association. Similarly, the culture is social, it also helps us to accumulate knowledge. Our forefathers are our associations, like our family institution is our association which we are growing up. So if they have a kind of knowledge which they have gained through the experiences, they pass that knowledge down to us, and in that way we also add our knowledge which we have experienced it in our generation, like in our situation, as our forefathers and our society is totally different because we have been grown up in a technologically advanced society. So their knowledge which is valuable and also our knowledge which we gain from our experience, they then get added, and in that way it leads to the accumulation of knowledge. It leads to adding new layers to our culture knowledge. And also the third thing is that people, ideas and actions can change rapidly in a single generation. As we are more able to communicate our ideas as we have been grown up in association, so it means that we can rapidly change the ideas. For example, the genetic makeup of individual is more or less fixed, but in case of the ideas and actions, they are more likely to change dramatically because it is something we can communicate and we can also experience it from the consequences. So in that way we can say that cultural ideas and actions can change rapidly even in a single generation. If any practice which is not fixed in a culture, it will then modify, or it might be like there were many practices that were prevailed during the age of our ancestors, but most of the practices has been abolished. Like in case of the hunting and gathering society, the people were using bow and arrow to use the hunting, but in nowadays we are using more advanced tools because that tools have been modified. There is now no need of that tools. We have now more better tools which we can use for this. So that's why we can say that there are some ideas and actions that can change rapidly even in a single generation, because culture is social. But as culture is social, there are also some disadvantages. In case of the hate ideologies, like we say that we have been brought up in association, so if there is any hate ideology that is prominent in an association, in a society, it can spread quickly to other members of the society, because we know that we actually absorb ideas and beliefs while living with others. So if there is any negative connotations which has been attached to any thing, or negative connotations which has been attached to, for example, the Western society, they view hijab differently as compared to the Asian or Muslim societies. So similarly, the hate ideology, racism, these all are just because that once these ideologies it enter into it it emerge in a society, because we are living in association through which we are exchanging our ideas and beliefs quickly. That's why we can say culture is social, which can sometimes lead to the hate ideologies also. So examples of it, like celebration of culture festivals. We understand that how to understand culture festivals by becoming part of it. Similarly, engaging in communal prayers, we understand the norms, that what kind of norms to be followed while praying in case of the collective audience, in case of the collective gatherings. And then wearing certain clothes for events, like we understand that which cloth is better or appropriate for this event, as we have experienced it over and over again in our society. So this is how we can say that culture is social. Now the third characteristic is that culture is shared. Now, culture is shared means that it is not something that individual alone can possess. It is something that is shared by majority members of the society. It is something that requires majority members of the society, so they will share and follow the same practices. In that way, it will become a culture. And as it is shared by majority members, like for example, I am part of the Pakistani society, and all the practices, these are shared by the other Pakistanis also. These are also the part or the Pakistani society. So we all are sharing the similar practices, like the Eid festival, which is prominent in our society. So it overcome the misunderstanding. Like I can predict the behavior of other Pakistanis on Eid of day, because it is a ceremony that is dominant in my culture. So I can predict the behavior of other just because a culture is shared. So it can overcome the chances of misunderstanding and also enable individual to predict the behavior of his fellow members. Similarly, we can say culture is shared means it is a collective phenomena, means that it is not an individual phenomena. It is shared by majority members of the society. It is something that majority members show consensus to, and that's why such norms and practices prevail in our society. So when we say that culture is shared, we look into the collective phenomena. Remember that these collective phenomena are independent of the geography. There might be that those people who are sharing the culture, they are geographically dispersed. For example, in case of the Western culture, like they are geographically dispersed, but on the other hand, it might be possible that the people who are sharing culture, they are geographically confined to a small island, for example, in case of the Pacific Island or Amazonian tribes. So in that way, we can say that it is not something dependent on geography. It depends that other people show consensus to it or not. So in that way, we can say that culture is shared either by the people who are geographically dispersed or either by the people who are geographically confined to a small island. Then, as we say that culture is shared by majority members, so each and every member of the society who are practicing the similar ways of life, it gives them a kind of cultural identity. Like Pakistani national language, Urdu, is a part of my cultural identity, along with other millions of Pakistanis who has also this cultural identity. So it means that it helps an individual a kind of cultural identity, and as to which group they conform to, their identity become the identity of that individual. Similarly, it will also reach to the subculture. For example, if there is a society who has a cultural identity, but within that society there are some other members who are sharing some distinctive practices also. In that way, it becomes a subculture. In case of the Pakistani society, as we have a mainstream culture, that is the Pakistani culture, but within that mainstream there are some subcultures. In case of the Balochi culture, Sindhi culture, now remember that Balochi culture is not a culture that is practiced by each and every Pakistani, but it is practiced by only the small section of the population, that is Balochis. So in that way it forms a subculture, but as it is shared by limited numbers, even if limited numbers by the limited numbers of the population, still it will be called as a subculture. So this is that how we say that culture is shared. So if we take the examples like language and food culture, these are the examples that how language is shared. For example, the Urdu language is shared by majority all Pakistanis. Similarly, food culture, like what is more popular in Pakistani food, like the national foods, these are also the part of our culture, which is shared by majority members of the society. Now the fourth characteristic is that culture is transmissive. When we say that culture is transmissive, it means that it passed from generation to generation, not through genes but by means of language. We have talked about it in the process of inculturation, that it is a process of cultural transmission. So culture is transmitted not through genes but by means of language. What is language? Language are the system of symbols which convey meaning. So the system of symbols, like in the form of the reading, writing, speaking, these all which help to understand the culture of the other people. So this transmission happens either through the families or through the schools or through communities or through media. These are all the means of transmission. It may be within any institution like family institution, education institution, even when you are living within a community, or even culture transmit through the media also. So we can say that example of the cultural transmission could be like, for example, the child learn how to read, write and speak native language. It is a culture which transmits from one generation to another. Similarly, our parents and family members, they teach children other things like stories, idioms that are important to that language, and also the expressions the expressions of particular language also. Similarly, our elders teach us some other rituals like lighting candles in weddings. This is the ritual that we learn from our elders. So this is a culture that transmits from one to another. Similarly, we can take another example like we learn about our national heroes, about our folklore or traditional music through our education institution. It's something which is taught in our schools. So this is that how culture passes from generation to generation. There are also other means like movies, television, social media, books that allow for the sharing of traditional stories and culture programs. This is that culture is transmissive. Now, the fourth characteristic is that culture is continuous and accumulative. How can we say that culture is continuous and accumulative? Okay, when we look into this portion that culture is continuous, it means that it does not stop to a generation. A culture did exist in a society when human association started. For example, in case of the hunting and gathering, when there were human association, the culture were existing. Although it was a primitive form of culture, but the culture do exist in each and every association of humans. So it is a kind of continuous, like it is not possible for us to stop culture to just confine to our generation. Some of its traits must pass to another generation. It's something continuous and natural. So we can say that culture is continuous. We can relate, or we can use a metaphor for culture. It is a kind of stream flowing down through the centuries from one generation to another. It's a kind of water flow which is going on from generation to generation through centuries. So that's why we can say it is continuous, like its transmission and its traits are something that it will be continuous, which once we get a primitive society and now we have a postmodern society, still the culture exists. It can never be stopped or confined to a particular generation. And similarly, we can say culture is accumulative. In case of accumulative, we'll say that culture builds on past knowledge, that we will have some knowledge on which the other layers of knowledge it get added and it build a new knowledge of culture. For example, in case of the medicine field, we will have we had some primitive knowledge in the form of medicine, like the treatment for diseases, but now there are more development occurring in a medicine field, like there are now more treatment for cancer patients. So in that way, the knowledge is building on the past knowledge, and it leads to the accumulation of culture knowledge. So we can say that culture is a growing whole, which includes in itself the achievements of the past also, and also the present, and make provisions for the future achievements of mankind also. So we can say that culture may thus be conceived of as a kind of stream which is flowing down through the centuries from one generation to another, and also that each generation adds new layers of knowledge and practices, and they also preserve the practices that were valuable from the past, and in that way culture builds on a past knowledge. For example, English, if we take the, okay, for example, in case of the medicine and science, as we discussed, the culture knowledge built over time, there are many treatments and the technological advancements that is undergoing over time. But there are some other examples could be like, for example, English language, which has accumulated words from the Latin, from the French, and also from other languages through the historical events like invasion and trade, whereas the English people, they have invaded different other countries and they have colonized that when we look into the history, and there are also trades among the British societies and the French societies. So we can say that just because of that historical events, the English knowledge get accumulated, and it get some words from the Latin, some from the French, and some from the other language. Similarly, in Urdu language is not its pure form, it has also get some words from the other languages. For example, in case of the Persian language, it has got some words. So we can say that the culture is accumulative, means that we get some traits according that whether these traits are appropriate for us or not, we absorb that traits, and it leads to the accumulation of culture knowledge. Okay, then the sixth characteristic is that culture is consistent and integrated. What does it mean that culture is consistent? If we look at it, the term consistent means that culture development is consistent. Like culture development that will happen, it's a never-ending phenomena. And integrated means that different parts of the culture are interconnected. Now, in case of how can we say that it is interconnected? For example, if we take the agriculture practices like the farming, where there is a division of labor, it is one aspect of our culture that there are divisions of labor, but this one aspect of a culture is affecting and it is interlinked with other aspects of our culture like cooperation, respect for land, respect for natives. These are the ideologies or the values that emerge out of this division of labor. So that's why we can say that it is integrated, because one part of the culture is interlinked, or we can say is dependent on the other part of the culture. Similarly, if we take the other example, like in case of the Islamic culture, the religious influence not only our worshipping practices, but it also affect our dietary routine. Like in case of the Islamic culture, it affect dress code, like wearing hijab is something that is mostly people linked to the Islamic culture, and dietary restrictions. Like in case of those who follow the Islamic culture, it also affect our other aspect of culture, that is our dietary restrictions. Like it forbid Muslims to consume the pork. So this is something we follow because of our Islamic culture, and how the one aspect of culture, that is our religious aspect, affect our other aspect of culture, that are our dietary restrictions, our food choices. So this is that how culture is consistent and integrated. Now the seventh characteristic is that culture is dynamic. Culture is dynamic. Dynamic means that culture is fluid rather than static. Means that it is not static. It is responsive to the changing conditions of the physical world. Whenever there is a conditions changing in the physical world, the culture will respond to that. It is not static. So it is hard to pinpoint exactly that what cultural dynamics are at play. It is hard to pinpoint the points at which the culture is changing, but culture as a whole is changing. It is a whole modifying to and in a response to the physical changes. So culture is ever changing and ever growing, means that it changes over time and it grow over time. It can't be stopped. For example, if we take the example of it, what could be the example that whenever there is a change in the in outside, in the physical world, there is a change in culture. For example, in case of the Pakistani context, if we take, when there were more influx of Afghan refugees during the Afghan-Soviet war, it changed the culture dynamics of Karachi, which was once dominated by the Urdu-speaking community. Now it has an ample population of Afghan Pashtuns. So it completely changed the population demography, the demography of the Karachi, which is a part of our culture. So this is how any change in a physical aspect of the world, it affect our culture. So this is how we can say that culture is dynamic, that it will give response to any physical change in the world. It is responsive, it is not something static. Okay, then the eighth characteristic is that culture is adaptive. Now, what does it mean by it, that it is adaptive? Means that it evolves according to the needs of the society. Culture develops as human adapts to the physical and the social environment. It means that it intervenes in the natural environment and it helps man in his process of adjustment. It is all adapt according to the needs of the human, and it adapts according for the ease and the human adjustment in a society. So we can say that there are new ideas. For example, in case of the feminism, the LGBT, these are the new ideas that emerge. There are also new tools like devices and machines, and the practices like wearing mask. Wearing mask was a practice which was never a part of our culture, but the culture adapt itself according to the changes, according to the the environment of the situation of that time. Like there was COVID, so that's why the culture of wearing mask is get started. So these are the the new ideas, the new tools, and the practice. It is something that integrated to the cultures to meet the emerging needs and challenges of the society. As the humans, they have always some emerging new needs, and they also face some kind of challenges. So the culture adapt according to that needs and according to that challenges. So we can say that culture develop as human adapts to the physical and the social environment. So in that way, mostly it leads to the formation of mixed cultures. Okay, for example, the gender roles have been expanded. If we take the example that the gender roles have been expanded as there are more industrialization, more modernization. Now culture has adapted according to the emerging needs. In a capitalist society, it has become more difficult to survive on a single salary, because now the gender roles have been expanded. This changing gender roles something which was needed by the society, because there is now difficulty in survival while living under the capitalist society if a woman they do not join the workplace. And also that there are also other examples, like in case of the online education, video calls, and the virtual celebrations have become the need of the time. When there was COVID, there was online education which for the first time emerged. So in case of the online education, it was a need of that time, and the COVID has now gone, but still this online education prevailed, and that's why we say that mixed culture emerged out of this characteristic. That although that there is now no need of online education, but still, as we have developed this new idea and we have developed this new way of education, so whenever there is also now the on-campus education, but at the same time there is now, if there is a need or depend on the situation, there is now a room for online education also. So it has now leads to the mixed culture of education. So video calls and virtual celebration, these are also emerged according to the needs of society, and which help the humans to adjust to the challenges which they are facing. So there is also some other kinds of adaptation, like in case of the environmental adaptation, when there is more severe or extreme conditions of weather, it helps us to adapt. It helps in a human adjustment or human adaptation to that environment in the form of wearing heavy clothes. Like we wear heavy clothes in cold. This is our culture. So it's something we change our choices depend on the weather of the society, depend on the conditions, that how much the weather is extreme. So this is that culture is adaptive. Now the other characteristic is that culture is gratifying. How can we say culture is gratifying? What does it mean by gratifying? Gratifying means satisfactory, that give pleasure. So culture is gratifying, it giving pleasure and satisfaction. Means that, remember, we have two types of needs. These are biological needs and the social needs. Biological includes all the needs that are fundamental, basic necessity that is required for the survival. For example, food, shelter, and clothing. These are biological needs. On the other hand, social needs are those that are our desires. For example, in case of the desire for status, desire for fame, money, mates, these are our social needs. So the emotional fulfillment of joy, it is also a social needs. So it is a culture that actually provide or guide us that which way should we adopt in order to fulfill our needs. Like, there are many ways to fulfill these needs, but culture actually define legitimate means for that. And that's why we can say that culture is gratifying. It has to fulfill our needs, by conforming to the norms of the society as well. So it provides a legitimate means and a prescribed ways which we have to follow in order to meet our needs. So culture provides prescribed means for the satisfaction of our needs that are biological and also our desires, the social needs. So for example, in case of the emotional fulfillments, like the spiritual practices like prayer, meditation, communal worship, it leads to a sense of inner fulfillment. This that it helps to fulfill our needs. So this is the we learn when we are living in a culture, that culture actually gratify, it helps to satisfy our needs. Either it's a biological needs or it's a social needs. It guides us. Culture actually provide a way that how to meet our biological needs. Like, the shelter is our it's our biological need. What kind of infrastructure prevail in our society? It is our culture. So what kind of houses do we use for our shelter is our culture. So we can say that culture actually provide a means of how to fulfill our needs. Okay. Then the 10th characteristic is that culture varies from society to society. It means that culture is not uniform. It changes when we move from one society to another. So we can say that culture of every society is unique to itself. And how it is unique, like a way of eating, a way of speaking, a way of greeting, dressing, entertaining, living, these all are unique to each culture. Culture elements like customs, traditions, morals, belief, values, ideologies, practices, philosophies, institutions, they are not uniform everywhere. So we can take example, for example, the way of greeting. In India, we say namaste. In Pakistan, salam is more prominent. In US, handshake is a way of greeting. In Japan, bowing a little bit is a way of greeting. So this is the the way of greeting that varies from society to society. Society is only the minor aspect of a culture. Similarly, if we go through the other ways, like the way of eating, the way of entertaining, the way of dressing, these are also different, vary from society to society. Similarly, if we look into the non-material culture, like the ideologies, the South Asian societies, they give more importance to collectivism. On the other hand, the Western societies give more importance to individualism. So this is that how the culture varies from society to society. Another example could be the language. Like the Japanese, they predominantly they speak Japanese, and the US they prefer to speak English. Similarly, Pakistan prefer to speak Urdu. Language is also part of our culture, so it varies from society to society. So it means that the traits of a culture is according to that society. It is according to that society in a context of and also it is unique to each and every society. Then the other characteristic is that culture manifests man's mind. Culture manifests man's mind that it reflects the human thoughts. It is the result of human thoughts. All the innovations that are part of our material culture, these are the result of the human intellect. And also the other aspects of our culture, like the ideology, these are the reflection of the human thoughts, because the new ideologies were emerging, like in the form of feminism. The new ideologies, when they were giving thought that we are getting exploiting and we are not getting equal rights, that's why the new rights and the new social movements and the new ideologies emerge. So it manifests the man's mind. Culture is a reflection of human thought, creativity, and intellect. There are new discoveries and innovation that are the results of the human thoughts. Similarly, we can say that how do we view a particular thing? It reflects our thoughts. It is part of our culture. For example, that emotional expression in case of the Western society is more open, but in case of the East Asian society, they mostly feel reluctant in order while showing their emotional expression. So there are some restraints, especially in case of the men who are living in an East Asian society. They can't express their emotions. Like, for example, if they are getting hurt, they can't cry. It's something associated with the gender, the gender aspect. So it means that this emotional expression is something open in Western society, but in case of the East Asian society is more restricted. So it is why it is restricted in East Asian society, because we are viewing these things differently as compared to the Western society. That's why we can see the culture manifests the man's mind. Okay, so in case of the, for example, if we case and take another example, like in case of the Latin America and the African countries also, they have more relaxed approach towards the perception of time. Like they do not give as much importance to time as the Western people give it to, and also they view social relationship and interactions as more important than strict adherence to schedules. But on the other hand, there are Western societies who give more importance to punctuality and who believe that time is a kind of commodity, is a kind of valuable commodity which must not be wasted. But on the other hand, the Latin American and African countries, they have a relaxed approach towards the time. So the perception towards time, perception of time is different, and it varies from society to society, because culture manifests man's minds because of their changes. It's because of the differences in a human thought. It's because of how humans perceive different things. Okay, then the 12th characteristic is that culture is knowledge. Culture is knowledge means it includes all the information, skills, and understandings about the way of living. It includes that how people, it includes the belief, arts, morals, law, customs, norms, values, symbols. These all are the knowledge that help us, like for example, how people do farming, how do people farm. This is according to the knowledge of that culture. Okay, for example, that what kind of technology prevail in a society, this is all about the information. So according to that skills and technology availability, the farmers do farming. So the techniques of farms also depend on the soil fertility and also the other aspect like the climate condition. So we can see that culture is knowledge, like it provide them a skills and information about how to farm. Similarly, how to cook, these are the practices of our culture. So this is also according to the taste that the food choice and the taste of that society, and also that how to navigate social relationship. Either the social relationship should be goal oriented or it should be the relationship oriented. Either it should be prioritized or the time should give more time should be prioritized over the social relationship, or the social relationship should be prioritized over the time. These all are the knowledge and understanding according to that society. So it include the culture is knowledge. It include all the beliefs. Beliefs is what is right and wrong. For example, if we think that what brings good luck, these are all the tenets or the convictions that people hold to be true. Also it include arts. Arts include music, literature, dance, and other creative expressions. Similarly, it include morals, which is the standards of society, like what is acceptable or unacceptable. These are our standards like honesty, respect, responsibilities. Similarly, law, these are the formal system of rules, which is the ethical standards, like what is legal, what is illegal in our society. That are for example, the custom, that are traditional practices and rituals like the greetings, the festivals, marriage ceremonies, way of dressing. Similarly, the norms of our society, like expected behavior, expected to say salam. Like I expect from other Pakistani to say salam whenever I meet them because it is norm of my society. Similarly, values like what is good and just in our society, and symbols like anything that carries a particular meaning. Like for example, winking an eye, it convey meaning of interest and sometimes offensive, depending on the context of society. So culture is knowledge. It provide a knowledge about all these aspects, and it help. All this knowledge is necessary if you want to live in a particular society, because it will guide your behavior, that what is acceptable in this society, what is unacceptable. And it also modify our practices in the form of, as we discussed, that how to cook, how to farm. This is all the which we modify according to the knowledge that we have and according to the society in which we are living. Okay, so then the 13th characteristic is that culture is patterns of behavior. What does it mean that it is patterns of behavior? Culture actually provide a kind of behavior that we believe will be similar to each and every individual because it is shared. So it provides a patterns of behavior, more regularities and patterning of the social relationship. Like for example, how family members interact with each other. If we look into the Pakistani society, how family members interact, you will find some regularities in the family members interaction. Like the parents, they have the status, a kind of more formal, and also in case of the either the nuclear family exists or the extended family exists, these patterns are also, we will find some regularity while living within a particular culture. Also, the other thing, that how males and females relate to one another, like how do we perceive different gender, opposite gender. This is also according to a society, and we can find regularities and patterns when we encounter with the different interactions between male and female while living in a same society. Like in case of Pakistan society, male and female gathering is not as casual as it is in a Western society. So it provides a kind of patterns, or you can say regularities. And also that how political leaders deal with subordinates. We have witnessed, we mostly heard in the Western culture that the political leaders, they are more casual with their audience, but in case of the Pakistani society, they are not like this. The elite class, they are more, they have keep a high social distance among themselves and also with their with the other classes of the society. So how political leaders deal with the subordinates. So we can say that culture is a patterns of behavior. It actually helps them to understand the regularities of the interactions of the society. Okay, as we discussed that these are the, according to the, it gives the patterns of interaction, but remember there is some concept of role also, to which group expectations are attached. Now there is a concept of role. Why are, when we say that the culture provide patterns of behavior, it means it helps us to understand our roles. Like in case of the group expectations, there are some rights and duties. Like my rights are those that my group agree what I deserve. What I deserve is my right, and what the other members of my society expect of me, these are my duties. So rights and duties are also depend on the group expectations. Okay, so for example, in case of the doctor, there are some regularities of pattern just because the role has been assigned to them according to the society. So the doctor has a right that they should deserve respect and they should deserve high pay as they are contributing more to our society. But on the other hand, they have also some duties, like they have to treat patient and also to give them equal respect. So this is that the patterns of behavior, as these are regularities, so it actually helps us to understand or clarify our roles also, and also to expect the other roles in our society. Okay, so for example, if the failure to fulfill the group expectation, it can lead to the formal and informal punishment. For example, if a doctor, he doesn't perform his job well, what will be the result? He will face formal punishment in the form of stopping the pay, or it might be in the form of the informal punishment, like the people, they will not approach such doctor. So in that way, we can say that this actually define our roles in a society also. Now remember, as we discussed, that group expectations have rights and duties. Rights are those which the other members of the society agree that I deserve, and duties are those which the other group members expect of me that I should do for them. And rights and duties are reciprocal. Like, your rights, like it means that my rights over you is your duty to me, and vice versa. Okay, it means that the doctor, if it is his duty to treat a patient, but on the other hand, it is the right of the patient that he must get treatment. So that's why we can say that rights and duties are reciprocal to each other. Now, as we say that the culture provides a kind of patterns of behavior that are regular, that show regularity. But remember that there are some, it cannot be possible that each and every aspect of individuals will be similar. There will be some kind of differences also in their behavior. We can't neglect the individual differences. Like for example, our social identity is different. For example, either an individual is old or young, either individual is male or female, or he is rich or poor. It is a social identity. So it can lead to the changes in behavior of individual. Okay, although culture provide a patterns of behavior, but that are as a whole. But at the individual level, just because of their individual identity, they can show some distinguishing characteristics also. And the other is the context and situation. For example, if you are interacting with your partner or your employee, these the both kind of interactions will be different from each other. So we can't generalize a single pattern of interaction with all other kind of interaction. It is not always like this. It is not that how I interact with my partner in the same way I will interact with my employee. It will not be like this. Just because of the context and situation, my interaction pattern will get changed. So we can't neglect these individual differences. And also that unique human individuality. Every individual, although they have been grown up in the same society and they show some resemblance in their behavior, but still there are some unique individuality also. Like for example, each and every individual, they are different in their emotional responses. It can lead to the difference in their behavior. Also, they are different in their appetite responses. They are different in the interpretation of events. Like how I interpret my religion and how the other interpret it might be different. It's not something which culture can enforce us to show some regularity, because these are something that are confined to the individual differences. And also our reaction to stimuli can be different. Some people, they may show over response, while others may neglect any event, any stimuli. So in that way, we can say that although even individuals who brought up in a same culture, they can differ in their behavior because of these three reasons. But in most of the time, they will show regularities, okay, as we discussed. Then the 14th characteristic is that culture is linked with the past. Culture is linked with the past means that culture preserves those features of the past which are of the eternal nature. For example, cooking. Cooking was something necessary, whether it was a hunting and gathering society or it is a post-modernized society, because people have to eat. Without eating, they will not survive, and they have to eat when they start cooking. So it means that although in case of the primitive society, the cooking form, it wasn't as developed as it is today, although the cooking patterns were different, but it is something that is linked with the past. Okay, so it means that culture will preserve those features of the past which are of eternal. So we can say that culture has some historical dimensions always. Culture has been objectified in the course of history in the form of institution. We have different institutions that actually are the objectify or the codify forms of our culture. For example, education, which once began just as an informal education, but it has now been institutionalized in the form of the formal institution, which we get now we are getting education in a formal setting. But education in beginning, it just began as an informal way or just as a leisure activity. So we can say that culture is linked with the past. We can't study our education institutions by just confining our study to current changes. We will, if we want to have more understanding of our education institution, we have to trace back to a history, that when and how the education for the first time began, and then how it get modified over time, what were the changes happen, who contributed to these changes, and then in that way we will be able that the structure of the education system which we have today, it had been manifested in our course of history. So it is linked with the past. Similarly, how people farm, it is also tied to our past, for it is tied to the agricultural revolution. Like the farmers who are now adopting the new technologies and who are using the advanced methodologies to farm, they are now using crop rotation and also using fertilizers. These are all which has not been which has not been invented itself. It's something which is a result of the industrial revolution which happened in the past, which happened in the 17th century. So it means that how people farm, all our practices, they have some roots in our history, and these are all the results of the historical events. That's why we can say that culture will always have historical dimensions. Okay, similarly, we can say that the religion, which once began just as an ideology, it was never an institution, but then it was codified in the form of institution, in the form of the sacred text, in the form of the mosque and churches. It was never like this. People were, people were using religion in order to have, a sense of fulfillment, the inner fulfillment. They were not, the religion was never an institution. So it just means that all the modified forms, all the ways of our life, they have some roots in our history. It has been evolved over time. That's why we are getting a solidified or the codified form of all these practices. So that's why we can say that culture has some historical dimensions. Okay, now the last characteristic which we will discuss is that culture is superorganic and ideational. It is a kind of technical term, okay? Superorganic is the term which was coined by Herbert Spencer, and superorganic means that culture is independent of human beings. It is the culture has a trait, and the trait is that they exist independently of human beings. For example, if there is any celebration or culture festival, that practice will exist. It is independent of my participation to it. It is independent of the individual participation. Either I participate in that festival or not, I as an individual can't impact this culture. I can't stop this culture to be stopped. As if I will not participate in it, it will not show any difference. The culture festival will go as it is. It will remain, it will persist in a society. So it is super organic, means that culture is neither organic nor inorganic in nature, but it is above these two. It is a kind of idea. It is not something that is dependent on a human being. It means that it is not something that is dependent on organic. It is not something that is dependent on a biological like human beings. It is independent of my participation in a culture festival, but it depends on a collective social structure. It depends on a collection of people. It is independent of individual personalities. For example, the English language, which consists of grammar, vocabulary, and rules that individuals follow, but these elements are not created or controlled by any single speaker. No, it is not controlled. For example, if I stop speaking English today, the English progress, it will not get stopped because it is independent of any single speaker of it. But it is actually, they are a part of a large culture framework that shapes communication. Similarly, the culture celebrations exist independently of any one person's participation in it. Similarly, we say that culture is ideational, means it is embedded in ideas in the form of our non-material culture. It guides our behavior, our actions, as we have information about it in the form of culture knowledge. So we can say example of it will be that culture celebrations exist independently of any one person's participation on it. Okay, so it is something or super organic, means it is above the the organic and inorganic things. For example, the social meaning of flag. Flag is not just a piece of color cloth. Color cloth means that it is not just a piece of organic. Culture does not view flag as in this way. Or what is the function of this piece of cloth? Culture is not concerned with this. But it represents a nation. The meaning which has been attached to the flag is important in culture. So as it represents the nation, this is what is necessary in culture. Okay. Similarly, the priests and prisoners, the professionals, these are not just biological beings, but they view differently depend on the perception toward their social status in a society. So it means that it is independent. It is just an idea. Either the flag exists or not exists, the meaning which has been attached to it is important for a culture. The meaning is that it represents nation. So either now the flag is available or not to me, the meaning will resist on its place. The meaning will be a nation. So either the thing is available or not. For example, if I participate in a ceremony, the communal prayer or not, it is independent. Culture is independent of my participation into it, because I'm an individual who can't create impact. It is all depend on the collective structure, that if there is a gathering, it is something that is meaningful to the culture. It is independent of an individual personality. So this is how we say that culture is super organic and it is ideational. Okay, also the belief system of our society, that belief system of our society, that is something ideational because it represents the ideas and the non-material aspects of our society and guide our behavior. So this was all about the characteristics of culture, the 15 characteristics of culture which we discussed in today's lecture. And if you have any question about any characteristic of culture, you can ask in a comment section. I will reply, inshallah. Okay, so this was the end of our lecture. Thank you so much for watching, and leave your questions in a comment section below. And also like, share and subscribe our channel for latest lectures. Thank you.